On the day she was thrown out with nothing but a swollen belly and a broken heart, the world decided Zinhondlovu was finished. Her husband had chosen another woman. Her home was no longer hers. And the child inside her was already being judged as a burden. What no one knew was this: the woman they cast into the street was standing on land that would one day bow to her name. Her fall was only the beginning of a reckoning written long before betrayal found her door. In the season when the rains delayed and the wind carried dust instead of promise, Zinhondlovu stood in a room that no longer felt like home. Her belly was heavy with life, round and full like a calabash nearing harvest, yet the man before her looked at it as though it were a burden he wished to set down and forget. The papers lay between them on the table, pale and stiff, still breathing the heat of the machine that had birthed them. They were the papers of separation, the kind that cut families apart without drawing blood. "Please, Benele," Zinhol said, her voice low, the way women speak when hope is already wounded. "I am 7 moons along. Where will I go?" Benele did not lift his eyes. His fingers tapped against his phone, restless, impatient. Once, those fingers had reached for hers in the dark. Once, he had promised her a future shaped by patience and shared struggle. Now they pushed a pen toward her, as one might push aside something already decided. "Sign it," he said. "Naledi is waiting." Naledi. The name carried weight in the city. She was his superior, his benefactor, the woman whose wealth rose like tall buildings that blocked out the sun. Her land stretched wide, her influence deeper than rivers. Compared to her, Zinhol's years of waitressing, cleaning offices, and skipping meals to pay tuition felt small, almost foolish. Zinhol's hands shook as she held her belly. Inside, the child stirred, strong and unaware of the storm gathering around her first breath. She looked at Benele and saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. "I fed your dreams," she whispered. "I worked nights so you could study. I gave up my schooling so you could finish yours. I stood when my legs begged me to sit, because you said one day it would be worth it." Benele sighed, as if she were reciting an old story he had grown tired of hearing. "You stopped trying," he replied. "You became small. Look at Naledi. She builds empires. She owns the ground people walk on. That is ambition. I am carrying your child. I did not ask you to keep it." The words fell heavy, like stones dropped into water. Something inside Zinhol cracked, something that had been holding her together for many seasons. She saw clearly then. She had loved alone. She had believed for two. Her hand hovered over the paper. The pen felt heavier than iron. The child kicked, sharp and sudden, as if reminding her that she was not alone, even now. Slowly, deliberately, she signed. Benele grabbed the papers before the ink could dry. "You have 2 days to leave," he said. "There is a shelter near the old road. They take women like you, like you." Zinhol stood, steadying herself against the table as the room tilted. "I hope she is worth it," she said. "She is," Benele replied, smiling. "She chose me. I chose you every day." "Yes," he said coldly. "Because you had no other choice." He left without looking back. Without touching her belly. Without saying farewell to the child growing inside her. Zinhol packed her life into 2 black bags. Clothes worn thin. A few photographs. A book of baby names she read each night like a prayer. Everything she owned fit into what she could carry. The shelter smelled of strong soap and old sorrow. That night, she lay awake listening to the quiet crying of other women, each carrying a story heavy as her own. She placed her hands on her belly. "It is all right," she whispered, though she did not believe it yet. "We will fight." Far away, beyond her knowing, a great woman named Mama Thandeka Kumalo breathed her last. a woman of wisdom and wealth, whose empire was built not only of stone and machines, but of a mother's longing. For 34 seasons, Mama Thandeka had searched for the daughter stolen from her arms. She had found her at last, and she left everything to Zinhol. The shelter gave Zinhol Ndlovu a narrow bed and 30 days measured by rules written on a fading board. 30 days to decide how to live when the ground beneath her feet had been pulled away like a mat in the night. That first night, sleep refused to come. She lay on her back, staring at a ceiling marked by cracks shaped like wandering rivers. Around her, the building breathed with the sounds of many women carrying many sorrows. Someone wept softly behind a thin wall. Somewhere down the corridor, a child coughed and was soothed by a tired voice. The air smelled of strong soap, old food, and the quiet despair of people who had nowhere else to rest their bones. Zinhol placed both hands on her belly. The child moved, slow and deliberate, as if listening. "I am sorry," Zinhol whispered. "I am sorry, I cannot give you more." Her words fell into the darkness and stayed there. She felt emptier than she had ever felt in her life. Hollowed out like a calabash left too long in the sun. She had never imagined that love could leave a woman so poor. She did not know that, even as she lay awake, others were searching for her. She did not know that her mother, Mama Thandeka Khumalo, had died 2 weeks earlier, her heart still stretched toward the daughter she had never stopped loving. She did not know that papers were being signed, seals pressed, fortunes transferred, all in her name. For now, Zinhol only knew hunger, fear, and the weight of tomorrow. The next days passed slowly, like clouds dragging their bellies across the sky. Zinhol filled out job applications in the shelter's common room, writing the same answers again and again until her hand cramped. No address, no steady work. 7 moons pregnant. She circled the jobs that asked the least questions: night stocking, cleaning, anything that might allow her to work unseen. The baby had been quiet all morning. Too quiet. Zinhol kept pressing her palm to her belly, waiting, counting her breaths. Panic crept into her chest like smoke. Then, at last, a small kick. She exhaled, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. A woman passed behind her and muttered, "Some people should not have children if they cannot afford them." Zinhol pretended not to hear. In 3 days, she had learned that skill well. Pretending not to hear. Pretending not to break. Pretending she had a plan. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message from Benele. "You need to sign one more paper, releasing me from all responsibility for the child. Meet me at the apartment in 1 hour or I change the locks." Her heart sank. He was still taking, still cutting. If she did not go, he would keep the few things she had left behind. Her grandmother's quilt, stitched with stories. The only photograph she had of her father. A small box of jewelry with no value except memory. "I will be there," she typed. She stood slowly, gathering her worn coat around her. Her body felt heavy, every step an effort. The walk to the bus stop took longer than it used to. Everything did now. That was when she saw them. 2 elders stood near the shelter entrance, dressed in suits so fine they seemed out of place on that cracked pavement. A man and a woman, both grey-haired, both holding a folder and wearing the cautious expressions of people who had stepped into unfamiliar territory. They looked at a paper, then at the shelter, then back at the paper again. The woman lifted her head and saw Zinhol. Her eyes widened. "Excuse me," she called gently. "Are you Zinhol Ndlovu?" Zinhol's first thought was debt collectors. Her second was officials. Her third was something worse, something she could not name but felt deep in her bones. "Who is asking?" Zinhol replied, her voice guarded. The man stepped forward, careful with his movements. My name is Mandla Maseko, he said. This is Auntie Lindu. We are representatives of the estate of Momathandeka Kumolo. The name meant nothing to Zinhul. I think you have the wrong person, she said. Mandla opened the folder. Zinhul Marine Lovu. Born in early autumn, many seasons ago. Father, Siphoned Lovu, deceased. Does that sound familiar? Zinhul's mouth went dry. How do you know that? Auntie Lindu's eyes filled with tears, which confused Zinhul more than the words. Because your mother searched for you for 34 years, the woman said softly. The world tilted. My mother died when I was small, Zinhul said. My father told me so. Mandla and Lindu exchanged a look heavy with truth. Your mother died 2 weeks ago, Mandla said gently. But she did not die when you were a child. She has been searching for you all your life. Zinhul's legs weakened. She sat down hard on a bench outside the shelter. That is not possible, she whispered. My father said she left us. He said she chose her work over me. Auntie Lindu sat beside her, close but not touching. Your father lied, she said. Your mother was young when she married him. The union was arranged. She did not know his cruelty until after you were born. When she tried to leave and take you, he threatened you. He vanished with you and changed your name. She spent her life searching. Zinhul could not breathe. Her child kicked sharply, sensing her distress. If she was searching, Zinhul asked, why did she not find me? She did, Mandla said quietly. 6 months ago, the air left Zinhul's lungs. She wanted to approach you carefully, Lindu continued. She watched from a distance. She was afraid of frightening you, afraid you would not believe her. She planned to come to you next season. She had already bought the ticket. Then her life ended suddenly. A sound escaped Zinhul, caught between a sob and a gasp. She knew about me, Zinhul said. And never came. She was coming, Lindu said, her voice breaking. She was writing to you. Preparing everything. Mandla opened the folder. Inside were years of searching. Photographs taken from afar. Records of a life watched with love and longing. Zinhul pressed a hand to her chest. The shelter behind her seemed to fade. A mother she never knew had been loving her all along. And the world, once empty, had begun to change. For a long while, Zinhul Ndlovu sat without speaking. The bench beneath her felt cold, as though it had been carved from stone meant to hold sorrow. Around her, the shelter continued its ordinary life. A door opened and closed. Someone laughed briefly, then stopped. The world did not pause for revelations. But Zinhul's world had split open. A mother, she whispered at last. You are saying my mother lived all this time? Mandla Maseko nodded slowly. She lived. And she searched. And she never stopped loving you. Zinhul shook her head, as if the truth were a wind she could physically push away. My father told me she abandoned me. He said she never wanted me. Auntie Lindu reached into her bag and pulled out a folded cloth, smoothing it carefully on her lap before speaking. That lie kept her awake many nights. Your mother feared you would believe it forever. Zinhul pressed both hands to her belly. The child moved, steady and strong, grounding her. Tell me, she said. Tell me everything. Do not protect me. Mandla opened his briefcase and removed a thick file, worn at the edges from years of handling. This, he said, placing it gently on the bench between them, is your mother's life for the last 34 years. Inside were records of journeys taken and leads followed. Notes written in careful handwriting. Receipts from investigators, old photographs taken from across streets and crowded rooms. Zinhul at 6, holding a chipped cup. Zinhal at 12, walking to school. Zinhal at 17, laughing with friends she no longer spoke to. Zinhal serving food at a diner. Zinhal walking beside Benele, her hand tucked into his arm. Zinhal's breath caught. She was watching me. She was loving you, Auntie Lindy corrected gently. From the only distance he was allowed. Mandla removed another envelope, this one sealed. Your mother left you a letter, he said. She wrote it over many months. She wanted you to understand everything. Zinhal's hands trembled as she took it. The paper felt heavy, not with weight, but with meaning. She opened it slowly. The first words were written in a steady, elegant hand. My beloved daughter. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. If you are reading this, Mandla read softly when Zinhal could not continue. Then I have gone where mothers must go when their work is finished. I am sorry I did not run to you the moment I found you. Fear made me slow. Love made me careful. Zinhal pressed the letter to her chest. A sound rose from her that she had never made before, a cry poured from deep within her bones. She knew me, Zinhal whispered. She knew my life. She knew everything, Auntie Lindy said. And she was proud of you. Of your strength. Of your kindness. Of how much you gave to others, even when you had little. Mandla reached into his briefcase again. There is more you must know. He placed another folder on top of the first. This one was thinner, newer. Your mother did not only watch you, he said carefully. She protected you. Zinhal looked up. From what? From the man you married, Mandla said. And from the woman he chose. Zinhal's stomach tightened. Benele. And Naledi. Mandla opened the file. Inside were bank records, messages, photographs. Proof laid bare like bones in the sun. Benele is drowning in debt, Mandla said. He owes more than he admits. Naledi paid a large portion of it 6 months ago. That is when their affair began. Zinhal felt something cold settle in her chest. She bought him. Yes, Auntie Lindy said. And she has done so before. They showed her the pattern. Younger men. Promises of love. Swift marriages sealed by iron agreements. Then abandonment. Each man left with nothing but shame and silence. Zinhal stared at the evidence. Text messages written with cruelty disguised as laughter. The pregnant one will sign anything. He is easy to train. Another foolish man who thinks love is what I offer. Zinhal closed her eyes. The child kicked again, as if reminding her that truth, though painful, was better than darkness. Your mother discovered all of this, Mandla said. She gathered proof so that one day, if you needed it, you would not stand alone. She protected me, Zinhal whispered. Even when I did not know she existed. Auntie Lindy nodded. A mother's work does not end with distance. Zinhal looked back toward the shelter. Peeling paint. Broken sign. The smell of defeat clinging to the walls. He's marrying her, Zinhal said slowly. In 6 days, we know, Mandla replied. At the Golden Horizon Hall. Zinhal let out a short, disbelieving laugh. She sent me an invitation. To mock me, Mandla and Lindy exchanged a glance, one that carried the weight of long experience. There is something else, Mandla said. The Golden Horizon Hall is one of the properties in your mother's estate. Zinhal frowned. What does that mean? It means, Mandla said gently, that you own it. The words took time to land. I own the place where they will marry. You own that hall, Auntie Lindy said. You own many buildings in this city. Including the one where Benele lives. Including the one where Naledi runs her business. Zinhal looked down at her worn shoes, at the loose seam of her dress, at her hands still marked by work. "I was never poor," she whispered. "No," Mandla said. "You were never poor." Zinhal closed her eyes. She felt the child move again, steady and strong, like a drumbeat. When she opened them, something had changed. "I want to attend that wedding," she said. Mandla smiled, slow and knowing. "You may. You are the owner of the ground they will stand on. And you will walk with me," Zinhal continued. "Not as my shield, but as my witnesses." Auntie Lindib's lips curved into a sharp, satisfied smile. "We would be honored." Zinhal stood, one hand on her belly, the other holding her mother's letter. "Then I need 6 days," she said. 6 days to read every word she wrote. 6 days to mourn her. 6 days to become the woman she believed I already was. The wind shifted, brushing her face like a blessing. And the path ahead, once dark, began to glow. Zinhal Ndlovu did not return to the shelter that night. Mandla Maseka and Auntie Lindy guided her to a quiet place high above the noise of the city, a home that belonged to her mother and now, by blood and truth, belonged to her. The rooms were wide and filled with light, the kind of light that did not glare, but rested gently on walls and floors. The air smelled clean, untouched by sorrow. Zinhal stood just inside the doorway, holding her small bags, unsure where to step. "For many years," Auntie Lindy said softly, "your mother kept this place waiting for you." Zinhal swallowed. She walked slowly from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of tables, as if afraid the place might disappear if she moved too quickly. On one wall hung photographs of landscapes from across the world. On another stood shelves filled with books, their spines worn by careful hands. She did not unpack that night. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her mother's letter to her chest. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant fires. Inside her, grief rose at last, no longer held back by survival. She cried for the mother she never knew. She cried for the years stolen from them both. She cried for the woman she had been, believing she was unloved and alone. And when the tears slowed, she began to read. For 6 days, Zinhal read her mother's words. She read them in the morning light and in the quiet hours before dawn. She read about fear and regret, about love that had nowhere to land, about a young woman trapped in a marriage built by others. She read about power learned slowly, earned carefully, and used always with purpose. Mama Thandeka wrote of watching Zinhal fall in love with Benele. "I wanted to reach through the distance and stop you," the letter said. "I wanted to tell you that love should not ask you to disappear. But I had no right. I was the mother who was not there." Zinhal read about the investigations, the files prepared, the safety net woven in silence. "I gathered proof not for revenge," her mother wrote, "but so that when the truth came, you would have a choice. Choice is power. Power is freedom." Each word reshaped Zinhal. Each page stitched something closed that had been torn for years. On the 4th day, Mandla and Auntie Lindy returned with tailors, stylists, and documents. They did not rush her. They did not command. They asked, "What do you wish to wear? How do you wish to arrive? What do you want said? And by whom?" Zinhal considered every question carefully. This was not about anger. This was not about spectacle. This was about truth standing in daylight. "I want nothing loud," she said. "Nothing cruel. I want clarity." They nodded. On the 5th day, Zinhal stood before a mirror and barely recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because she stood differently. Her shoulders no longer curved inward. Her eyes no longer searched the floor. She placed her hand on her belly and felt her daughter move. Steady and sure. "You will never beg for love," Zinhal whispered. "I promise you that." On the 6th day, the city burst with excitement. People spoke of the wedding as if it were a celebration for all, a joining of wealth and ambition. Invitations glittered. Music was rehearsed. Flowers were arranged in endless white rows. At the Golden Horizon Hall, workers moved like ants, polishing floors that Zinhal now owned. They did not know her name, but they worked on her ground. Zinhal dressed slowly. The fabric she wore was deep indigo, the color of night water under moonlight. It flowed easily over her belly, honoring life rather than hiding it. On her neck rested a necklace that had once belonged to Mama Thandeka, stones chosen not for display, but for rendance. Mandla and Auntie Linda waited for her, dressed in dark, simple clothing. Behind them stood quiet security, not aggressive, not loud, simply present. As they entered the vehicle, Zinhal looked back once, not at the city, but at the woman she had been 6 days before. Homeless, betrayed, unseen. I forgive myself, she whispered. For staying. For believing. For loving. The car moved forward. Inside the Golden Horizon Hall, the guests had gathered. Laughter rose like foam. Glasses clinked. The string musicians tuned their instruments. Benele stood tall at the altar, pride straightening his spine. He wore confidence like borrowed cloth, unaware it was about to be taken back. Naledi waited at the entrance, wrapped in silk and certainty, her smile sharp with triumph. The officiant lifted his book. Before he could speak, the doors opened. Silence fell. Zinhal stepped into the hall. Every eye turned. She walked slowly, her pace unhurried, her presence undeniable. The room seemed to hold its breath. The light caught the stones at her throat, but it was her calm that commanded attention. Benelli's smile faltered. What is she doing here? Naledi hissed. Zinhal stopped at the center of the hall. You invited me, she said, her voice carrying easily. You said I should come and see. Naledi signaled sharply. Remove her. I would advise against that, Mandla said, stepping forward. Miss Zinhundlovu owns this building. Laughter rippled, uncertain. That is nonsense, Benele said, though his voice shook. Mandla raised a document. 2 weeks ago, Mama Thandeka Kimolo passed away. Zinhundlovu is her only heir. The whispers became a roar. Naledi's face drained of color. Zinhal looked at Benele then, truly looked at him. She felt no rage. No longing. Only distance. My mother searched for me for 34 years, Zinhal said. She left me many things. Wealth among them. Truth among them. Auntie Linda stepped forward and opened her folder. The evidence spoke. Numbers. Messages. Patterns repeated until denial collapsed under its own weight. Benele turned to Naledi. You said. Naledi did not answer. Zinhal stepped closer, her voice low, meant only for him. You asked me what it felt like to be chosen. Now you know what it feels like to be exposed. His knees buckled. Zinhal turned away before he hit the floor. I choose myself, she said to the room. And I choose my child. She placed her hand on her belly and walked out. The hall erupted behind her, but she did not look back. Outside, the air felt clean. For the first time, Zinhal was not surviving. She was free. Zinhundlovu did not return home immediately after leaving the Golden Horizon Hall. She asked Mandla Maseko to drive her through the older parts of the city, where the roads narrowed and memories clung to walls like faded paint. She wanted to see the places where her mother had once walked, breathed, and waited. The city felt different now, as though it recognized her. They stopped near a small market where women sold roasted maize and dried fish. Auntie Linda stepped out first and greeted the vendors by name. Many of them remembered Mama Thandeka Kumalo as a quiet woman who bought little but watched much. Zinhul listened, her heart tightening with every shared memory. She stood right there sometimes, one woman said, pointing to a shaded corner. She would watch the road, as if expecting someone. Zinhul closed her eyes and pictured her mother standing alone. Hope balanced carefully against fear. Grief came again, but this time it carried warmth instead of emptiness. That evening, Zinhul returned to her mother's home and slept deeply for the first time in many seasons. She dreamed of water flowing backward, returning to its source. When she woke, sunlight filled the room, and the child within her moved with calm assurance. Zinhul rose knowing her life had turned toward permanence. In the days that followed, the world responded to the truth revealed at the wedding. News traveled quickly, carried by whispers, messages, and headlines. Benelli's name became a cautionary tale spoken with disapproval. Naledi vanished from public view, her empire cracking under scrutiny. Zinhul did not celebrate their fall. She understood now that justice did not always require joy. She focused instead on learning the shape of her inheritance and the responsibility tied to it. Mandla guided her through documents, properties, and long-term plans. The wealth was vast, but it did not intoxicate her. It felt like land returned after years of drought. Mama Thandeka had built it patiently, brick by brick, choice by choice. Zinhul resolved not to waste what had been born of sacrifice. One afternoon, Zinhul visited the shelter she had left behind. She walked through the same doors, now carrying fruit baskets instead of fear. The women stared, uncertain, until recognition softened their faces. Zinhul greeted them as equals, not as a savior. She spoke with the director quietly in a small office. The building needed repairs, resources, and dignity. Zinhul offered funding without conditions, only transparency and respect. The director wept openly, overwhelmed by the simplicity of the gift. Zinhul returned often after that. She listened to stories without interrupting. She remembered how invisible pain could be when survival demanded silence. Her presence alone began to change the atmosphere. As her pregnancy advanced, Zinhul felt her daughter's personality emerge. The child responded to music and stillness alike. Zinhul spoke to her daily, telling her stories of lineage and resilience. She promised her a life rooted in truth. At night, Zinhul continued reading her mother's journals. She discovered pages written after finding her, filled with gratitude and sorrow. Mama Thandeka had believed Zinhul's strength would outlive her absence. That belief became Zinhul's anchor. One entry spoke of legacy beyond blood. Wealth must remember where it came from, her mother had written. If it forgets, it becomes a curse. Zinhul read the line many times, letting it settle in her bones. She began planning a foundation in her mother's name. It would support women escaping coercion, forced marriages, and financial entrapment. It would fund education quietly, without spectacle. Its work would move like roots, unseen but strong. Mandla watched these decisions with approval. "You are not rushing," he said one evening. "You are building." Zinhul smiled, knowing that was the highest praise. One morning, Zinhul received a message from Benelli. It was short and trembling, filled with regret and apology. She read it once and did not respond. Some doors, once closed, must remain so. Instead, she wrote a letter to her unborn daughter. She spoke of love without possession and strength without cruelty. She promised to tell her the truth, even when it was difficult. The letter felt like a bridge between generations. As her belly grew heavier, Zinhul slowed her pace. She learned to rest without guilt. She allowed joy to exist alongside grief. Both had earned their place in her life. One evening, As the sun lowered itself gently behind the city, Zinhal stood on her balcony. She placed one hand on her belly and the other on the cool railing. She whispered her mother's name into the wind. The air answered with quiet peace. The ground beneath Zinhal no longer shifted. It remembered her now. It knew her name and held it firmly. And Zinhal, at last, stood rooted. The first pains came before dawn, soft but insistent, like fingers tapping on a door that would not be ignored. Zinhal Ndlovu woke slowly, her body already aware of what her mind was still catching up to. She lay still for a moment, breathing through the sensation, listening to the quiet house. Then another wave came, stronger, carrying certainty with it. "It is time," she whispered. Mandla Maseko arrived before the sun fully rose, calm and prepared, as though this moment had been written long ago. Auntie Lindu followed close behind, her presence steady, her voice low and reassuring. They moved with practiced care, wrapping Zinhal in warmth and patience. No urgency, no fear, only readiness. As the car moved through empty streets, Zinhal thought of her mother. She imagined Mama Thandeka walking beside her, unseen but near, guiding her through this final threshold. Pain came and went like waves against a shore, demanding attention but offering rhythm. Zinhal held on to that rhythm and did not break. The hospital lights were bright but not cruel. The nurses spoke kindly, recognizing strength even when it was quiet. The nurses spoke kindly, recognizing strength even when it was quiet. Hours passed, measured not by clocks but by breath and endurance. Zinhal's body worked with ancient wisdom, older than fear. When the final moment came, it came fiercely. Zinhal cried out, not in despair, but in release. And then, suddenly, there was a sound that split the air open. A cry, sharp and alive, announcing arrival. "She's here," someone said. They placed the child on Zinhal's chest, warm and damp and perfect. Zinhal looked down at her daughter, and felt the world rearrange itself. The baby's eyes fluttered open briefly, dark and curious. Zinhal laughed through tears, she did not bother to wipe away. "Welcome," she whispered. "You are wanted." Auntie Lindy leaned close, her face glowing. "She has your calm," she said. "And your mother's eyes," Mandla added softly. Zinhal nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deep within her. She named the child Osantel, a name of gratitude and acknowledgement. For survival. For truth. For love that endured distance and silence. In the days that followed, Zinhal learned the language of new life. Sleepless nights, fragile cries, moments of awe so sharp they almost hurt. She moved slowly now, guided by her daughter's needs. The world narrowed and deepened all at once. Visitors came quietly, bringing blessings rather than advice. Some spoke prayers. Others brought stories of Mama Thandeka, filling gaps Zinhal had never known how to name. Osantel slept through most of it, held by arms that carried history. Zinhal often sat by the window with her daughter pressed against her chest. She told Osantel about the women who came before her. About strength that did not shout. About patience that outlasted cruelty. "You come from women who did not disappear," Zinhal said softly. "Even when they were erased, they endured." As the weeks passed, Zinhal returned slowly to her work. The foundation in her mother's name began its first quiet efforts. No ceremonies, no speeches, only actions placed carefully where they were needed. Zinhal insisted on anonymity for those helped. She visited the shelter again, this time carrying Osantel. The women gathered around, their faces softening at the sight of new life. Hope moved through the room without announcement. Zinhal saw herself reflected in many of their eyes. One evening, as she rocked Osantel to sleep, Zinhal received news of Benelli. He had left the city, his ambitions stripped bare. Zinhal felt nothing sharp at the mention of his name. Only distance, clean and complete. Nalady's name surfaced less and less. Power built on harm had eaten itself. Zinhal did not follow the story. She had learned that attention was a form of currency, and she spent hers elsewhere. Late one night, Zinhal dreamed of her mother again. Mama Thandeka stood by a river, her face peaceful, her hands open. She looked at Unshakeable and smiled. Then she turned and walked into light. Zinhal woke with tears on her pillow and gratitude in her chest. She held her daughter closer. Some endings, she understood now, were also beginnings. Some absences were filled by purpose. Unshakeable grew quickly, her presence reshaping every corner of the house. Laughter returned, not as an echo, but as a new sound entirely. Zinhal found joy in small routines. Morning light, warm milk, quiet songs. The city learned Zinhal's name in time, though she never sought it. They spoke of her as firm but fair, distant but generous. She accepted the descriptions without attachment. What mattered lived at home, in her arms. One afternoon, Zinhal stood beneath a jacaranda tree, Unshakeable strapped against her back. Petals fell like soft rain. Zinhal thought of lineage, of roots and branches. She knew now where she belonged. "I am here," she whispered, to the earth, to the past, to the child who would carry the future forward. The wind moved through the leaves in reply. And the ground, steady and sure, held them both. Years passed gently, marked not by struggle but by growth. Zinhal learned that peace did not arrive loudly, but settled slowly, like dust after rain. Her days were full, shaped by intention rather than urgency. Life no longer pushed her forward, she walked it with purpose. Unshakeable grew into a child of quiet confidence. She asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to the answers. Her laughter carried warmth, not restlessness. Zinhal watched her with wonder and steady love. The house that once waited in silence now carried many voices. Friends gathered often, sharing meals and stories late into the night. Children played in the garden, their feet learning the land. The walls absorbed joy and gave it back freely. The foundation thrived without spectacle. Women found shelter, education, and dignity through its work. Many never knew Zinhal's face, only the relief of opportunity. That anonymity pleased her deeply. Zinhal taught Unshakeable through stories rather than commands. She spoke of Mama Thandeka as a woman of courage and patience. She spoke of truth as something living, not fixed. Unshakeable listened, absorbing legacy through voice and presence. On certain evenings, Zinhal returned to the old market. She greeted the vendors as family. They watched Unshakeable grow, measuring time by her height and laughter. The city remembered them both. Benelli's name became nothing more than a distant echo. Nalady's ambition faded into quiet irrelevance. Zinhal did not celebrate their absence. She understood that healing did not require enemies. Unshakeable learned early the value of stillness. She sat beside her mother during quiet mornings, watching birds gather crumbs. She learned that strength could be gentle. That power did not always announce itself. When Unshakeable turned 7, Zinhal took her to the river from her dream. They stood at its edge as water moved steadily past. Zinhal told her that life flowed forward but never forgot its source. Unshakeable nodded, understanding more than words could explain. At night, Zinhal sometimes dreamed of her mother. Mama Thandeka appeared less often now, her presence complete. When she came, she smiled without sadness. Zinhal woke each time with gratitude. The city continued to change, but Zinhul remained anchored. She refused to rush growth or force outcomes. Her decisions were measured, shaped by care. She had learned the cost of haste. Ashantel entered school with curiosity and kindness. She defended those who were quiet. She shared what she had, without instruction. Zinhul recognized her lineage in every gesture. One evening, as they sat beneath the stars, Ashantel asked about her name. Zinhul told her it meant gratitude, a remembering. Gratitude for survival, for truth, for love that endured absence. Ashantel held the meaning close. You were wanted before you arrived, Zinhul said. You were protected before you were known. Ashantel leaned into her, secure. The words became part of her foundation. Zinhul visited the shelter less often now, trusting the work to continue. The building stood stronger, filled with purpose. Women passed through it and moved on. The cycle of becoming continued. On the anniversary of her mother's passing, Zinhul lit a single candle. She spoke her name aloud. She thanked her for the life reclaimed. The flame burned steadily. Zinhul understood now that stories did not end. They folded into the next generation, reshaping themselves. Pain became wisdom. Loss became direction. Ashantel grew taller, her steps confident on familiar ground. She belonged to herself and to those who came before. Zinhul watched her and felt no fear. The future felt capable. One morning, as jacaranda petals fell again, Zinhul smiled. The earth beneath her feet felt firm and known. Her name, her story, her place was secure. Nothing needed proving. And so the story closed where it truly began. With a woman standing in truth, with a child rooted in love, with the ground remembering them both.